loves, my name is Jay, and I'm celebrating the fact that Black history is so gay, and you can too! Before we start this video, it's important to go over terms. Now, the official acronym to describe the community that we'll be celebrating today is LGBTQIP2SAA. This stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, queer, intersex, pansexual, two-spirit, androgynous, and asexual. Each letter is equally important. Each letter is equally valued, especially here. However, each letter will not be repeated the multiple times that I reference our community. My intention is not to offend, not to disrespect, but to make it through the video. Now, let's get started. So last year, I attended the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. After a summer of protesting police brutality and police murder of Black people in America with little to no accountability, I felt that it was especially important for me to go to Washington and march in solidarity with other Black people and our allies. And everything was great until I ran into this. During this time of unity and remembrance of the people who marched before us, it was really disappointing to see the Black Israelites clashing with LGBT plus activists and their allies. As Black people, we're already facing white supremacy, police murder and violence, a racist and exploitative judicial system, voter suppression, the school-to-prison pipeline, people debating on how we should be allowed to wear our hair in public spaces. And with all of this going on, you came to this event in order to bash your Black brothers and sisters because they happen to be LGBT plus? Are you serious? As a queer person, I was offended. And as a Christian, I was confused because Romans chapter 2 clearly states, "You therefore have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else, for at whatever point you judge another, you are condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things." In other words, everyone, including those guys in the pretty purple dresses, have fallen short of the glory of God, and therefore no one is in a position to judge or condemn anybody else. In my belief, Jesus taught radical love, grace, and humility towards everyone. That's what made him so cool. That's what made him so controversial. And that's why we're still talking about him till today. In recent years, BLM has become a more inclusive movement. This started off with recognizing that Black women too have been victims of police murder and brutality. And then it expanded to spread awareness of the Black trans people who have been murdered in this country. Now, I'm not sure why or how the movement became so concentrated on just Black men, because its co-founders, Patrisse Cullors, who is queer, Alicia Garza, who is also queer, and Opal Tometi are all feminists who have actively advocated for the inclusivity of all Black people in the Black civil rights movement. All Black lives matter to the founders. Therefore, if you are joining the BLM movement, all Black lives need to matter to you. This Black History Month, continuing with the theme that all Black lives matter, I feel like it's important, especially as a queer person, to recognize and celebrate the Black LGBT plus individuals who have contributed to the legacy of excellence and to the civil rights movements of both the LGBT plus and Black communities. Now, you cannot talk about American LGBT plus history without talking about Stonewall. The Stonewall Uprising occurred June 28, 1969. It was sparked by a violent police raid of the Stonewall Inn, a gay club. The uprising launched the gay liberation movement in America and has led to the many rights that we enjoy today. Just to be clear, though the uprising was a pivotal moment in the LGBT plus movement, it did not start the movement altogether. The LGBT plus movement started long before Stonewall. For example, in 1955, there was the Daughters Abilities, which was the first lesbian rights group in the US. And 5 years before that, in 1950, the Medicine Society was founded, which was an LGBT rights group. Another myth about the Stonewall Uprising is that Marsha P. Johnson, a trans activist, was the first one to throw a brick at the police. Contrary to common belief, she was not the first person to throw a brick at the uprising, and her homegirl Sylvia Rivera wasn't either. In fact, it was the civil rights activist, Black lesbian stud Stormy Delavari who rallied the people at Stonewall to fight against the police. During the raid, the police attacked her, and as she was fighting back, she screamed out to the surrounding crowd, "Why don't you do something?" These are the words that sparked action. These are the words that launched the uprising. In one breath, not only did she contribute to the fight against police brutality for both the Black and LGBT plus communities, but she also sparked the uprising that has led to the many rights that us in the LGBT plus community experience today. Now let's get back to Marsha. After the Stonewall Uprising, Marsha Pay It No Mind Johnson, along with her friend Sylvia Rivera, co-founded STAR, the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. Just as a side note, the term transgender was not as commonly used back then as it is today. As a self-identified gay person, transvestite, sex worker, and survivor, Marsha P. Johnson served as a drag mother who created safe spaces and advocated for struggling homeless LGBT plus youth. She also advocated for those living with HIV/AIDS. As a woman who had been arrested over 100 times, Marsha P. Johnson fought tirelessly against police brutality and harassment in the LGBT plus community, a common occurrence at that time. So to all of you non-Black LGBT plus people, sitting in the privilege of knowing that you're safe from police raids and brutality and harassment, watching Black people continue the fight till today, I repeat the words of Stormy. Why don't you do something? Black people fought for your safety, and now it's time for you to return the favor. And for those who are out there, thank you, and please keep it up because the fight is far from over. Now, in regards to Black history, you have to talk about the Harlem Renaissance. During the Great Migration North, Black people formed their own communities within the cities of the northern areas of the US. One of the most famous of these communities is Harlem, located in Manhattan, New York City. During the New Negro movement, the intellectual blossoming of African American art, culture, and literature became known as the Harlem Renaissance. The thriving entertainment scene in Harlem became a safe space for creativity, experimentation, and challenging the norms, especially gender norms. It became a place where you'd see same-sex dancing, interracial dancing, and gender bending. This leads us to Gladys Bentley, the unapologetically Black, lesbian, gender-bending blues pianist and singer. Since childhood, Gladys Bentley always expressed how she felt more comfortable and more like her authentic self while wearing what was known as traditionally male clothing. Her parents fought often with her, trying to make her more feminine, but she rebelled by wearing her brother's clothing. As soon as she was able to, Gladys Bentley ran away to Harlem, where she would be more accepted. During the 1920s, Gladys Bentley worked the club party circuit. Now, there's a story of her attending a club in Harlem where they were looking for a pianist. Historically, they've only had male pianists, but she said it was a good time to change that and wowed the audience. Beyond her musical talents, Gladys Bentley became famous for her drag performances and challenging anti-cross-dressing laws, such as the ones in California. One of the coolest facts that I found about Gladys Bentley is the fact that in 1931 in New Jersey, she had a public marriage with not just another woman, but a white woman. Mind you, this is 30 years before the legalization of interracial marriage in America, and almost 80 years before the legalization of gay marriage. Not only did Gladys Bentley contribute to Black music and entertainment, she also fought so LGBT plus people and Black people could have marriage equality. Another big name in the Harlem Renaissance was James Baldwin, poet, essayist, fiction writer, Black civil rights leader, and gay civil rights leader. Throughout his career, James Baldwin not only stood up against racism as a Black man in America, but also against homophobia as a gay man in the Black community. In his literary work, James Baldwin challenged conventional norms by humanizing Black lives and gay lives. Baldwin grew to political celebrity through his art, public speeches, and interviews. He even moved in the same circles as Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Now, in regards to Martin Luther King Jr., yes, he was a huge, monumental voice in the Black civil rights movement, but also, yes, he was extremely homophobic. We have to remember that Martin Luther King Jr. was still a Christian preacher, and there was still a lot of homophobia in the Black community, specifically the Black Christian church. Therefore, he often made it a point to separate himself and distance himself from openly gay Black civil rights activists such as James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin. This is crazy because MLK Jr. inspired James Baldwin and a lot of his writings, and Baldwin openly supported MLK in a lot of his endeavors. In fact, he was standing on stage as Martin Luther King Jr. gave the I Have a Dream speech during the March on Washington. An event, by the way, co-organized by Bayard Rustin, an openly gay Black man. Despite all of this, it is said that the only reason why James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin were not asked to speak that day was due to their sexual orientation. He fought against racial discrimination in employment as well as gay rights. It was organizers such as Bayard Rustin who led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voters' Rights Act of 1965. His tireless work in the Black and LGBT plus liberation movement has led to the freedoms and the rights that we have today. Now, I've only scratched the surface of the contributions of Black LGBT plus people to the culture, civil rights, and safety of the LGBT plus and Black communities. It is important to recognize and honor these figures, especially since this demographic of people is often neglected and ignored by both communities. For example, the past couple of years have proven to be the deadliest for Black trans women. In 2019, known as the LA Predator, political activist Ed Buck was accused of preying on gay Black men and forcibly injecting them with fatal doses of drugs. He specifically targeted gay Black men who were homeless and struggling with addiction. Now, should we treat these issues as strictly Black issues or LGBT plus issues? Or can both communities put down these arbitrary labels and differences and rally around the most vulnerable members of their communities? the same exact way they rallied around the Black community during the Civil Rights Movement and the LGBT plus community during the gay liberation movement. As a Black queer person, I oftentimes felt the need to separate my sexual orientation from my race. When navigating predominantly Black spaces, specifically at church, I've always felt pressured to conceal my sexual orientation. On the flip side, I have found the LGBT plus community to be extremely segregated by race. And white supremacy definitely still reigns high within the community. For example, in regards to representation, it's oftentimes white people, upper class white people. Though over the years, the Black community has evolved to be more accepting of LGBT plus people, I still find the community to still be ignorant of the challenges that they face. And oftentimes, these challenges are not included in conversations about civil rights. At the end of the day, we are all working class people, and we need to start looking past these arbitrary labels and differences. We need to start recognizing the intersectionality of our challenges. LGBT plus issues are Black issues, and Black issues are LGBT plus issues as well. Now, I can already hear my fellow Christians slapping at the keyboards about your spiritual beliefs. We live in a free country. You are free to believe whatever you want to. However, when your beliefs lead to hate, violence, and degradation of vulnerable people, that's where we have to draw the line. Lives are literally at risk. We are facing too much as working class people to distract ourselves with these petty arguments. And of course, the unification of the LGBT plus community and the Black community isn't going to magically happen overnight. Both communities have caused each other harm in the past, and there are complex and heavy conversations that we're going to have. However, I would like to leave you with this quote by Huey P. Newton, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party. Friends are allowed to make mistakes, and the Gay Liberation Front are our friends. They are our potential allies, and we need as many allies as possible. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe in order to get notifications of more of my videos. And wherever you are on your journey, know that I am so very proud of you and I love you. Bye.